Welcome. It is March 12th, 2026. This is our last show we have before we are taking a little bit of a spring break. I think it's actually spring break for Owen, and I'm just taking it as a good opportunity to rest a little bit. We had a week this week that is very indicative of Maryland spring. It was like 80 earlier in the week, and then it snowed today. And it's like 50 degrees now or 40 degrees now or something. Very weird, very weird. But how you doing this week, Owen?
I'm good. I'm here in my sweatpants. I don't always wear sweatpants for the show, but yeah, pre-spring break episode, staying cozy.
Yeah, it's good to take I think the concept of a spring break is something that we oftentimes stop having if we aren't working in schools or working with young people or something like that. But I think it's a thing we should always have, we should always have a chance to take a break in the spring, to relax, rejuvenate, to come back and start again. So when you said last week that it was your spring break next week, I was like, all right, well, I want one too. So
Yeah, you've been working hard. You deserve a spring break.
yeah, I was down in Annapolis 3 days this week. Trying to do some work on some of the bills we've been working on. Our constitutional amendment bill had a hearing on Monday, and on that day we also got to see some folks working on a Gaza resolution and some folks working on an anti-nuclear war resolution. All those will be folks that we have coming on later. On Tuesday, I was down to try to meet with delegates talking about our HB 101, which is our debate access bill. And then Wednesday was a packed day. There was a rally against data centers first thing in the morning. Then there was a teachers union rally for rights to strike, and then a whole day of hearings and glee. And so it's been a lot of good stuff. And I was happy to not be down there today when the snow came. I did enjoy being in Annapolis those days this week when it was 80 degrees. It was a nice reminder to get down by the water and appreciate that the city is more than just the capital. So
yeah, and you've been kind of saying how you've been improving that relationship with folks on that committee, but you've also described in some of our conversations that just folks, workers around town are starting to recognize you and say what up.
Yeah. So between a guy at the security, a grounds person, and a waiter at a restaurant, as well as activists and advocates who've been watching the show and talking about parts of the show that they remember us talking about and things like that, it's really starting to feel like doing this work is beginning to reach people, especially reaching people, two groups of people. Like I thought it was interesting that it was, the security folks, the grounds folks, the wait staff. That was a bit surprising to me. It shouldn't be. We're running for governor. It's a big office and people see us, but it is a little bit. It wasn't surprising to me that advocates on issues like peace, on ecology, on Palestine, on reparations and things like that have been finding us because we are speaking their language. We are in the place where they are right now. We're talking the issues they're talking about, but it is good. It is reaffirming to understand that we're starting to reach people and that people are seeing what's going on and, paying attention to it.
Yeah, I see this trajectory kind of going alongside getting some mentions on public radio, starting to staff up, sending out postcards to Southern Maryland, going on longer road trip style campaign events. Things are starting to percolate a little bit. It's early days yet in the spring, but yeah, I don't want to call it breaking out, but it feels like, yeah, we're getting a little bit more attention than we had been before, which is a great feeling.
Yeah, we're about 230 something days out from the election. And I think people are starting to pay attention to the election. I think we've always kind of known that when we're 300, 400, 500 days out, most people who aren't running a campaign or involved in a campaign or a journalist aren't paying that much attention. But now we're getting to the place where people are paying attention and they're starting to see that we're one of the choices, and they're starting to see that we have good content and good ideas out there. And I think think when we come back from spring break, it's going to open up a new phase of the campaign where we're out and about across the state more. We're going to shift our focus from Annapolis to make sure that we're ready to do spring stuff, go to farmers markets, go to fairs, go to festivals, see greens all over the state. And I think that's really exciting. And I think having Andrew, who we announced last week, come on board is going to be really good. He's starting to do outreach to folks. He's starting to get folks engaged in watching the show. He's starting to get folks set up with volunteering stuff. And I think it's, the building work is doing what we need it to do.
Yeah. And of course, we talk about that big number, 200 something days until election day, but a big chunk of the votes in the general election come in before then, mail and early voting. And then we're also coming up fast on our Maryland Green Party primary this summer. So really, we've got a few different calendars that we're paying attention to. And that's really exciting too, to get to engage with the base of the Green Party around the state leading up to that primary.
Yeah, totally. So we got a big show tonight. We're going to just talk about some of the stuff that's been going on. We're going to do a little bit of zoom out to begin with and talk about our approach to legislative work. Like you keep hearing me say I'm down in Annapolis and seeing all this testimony. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the why of that and what we think it means. Then do some of the week in review. Last week, we started the preview of our education platform. This week, we'll finish it up. We released it on Wednesday. A lot of the folks at the Teachers Union Right to Strike rally were very excited about it, and I think it's going to be well received. And then we're going to talk a little bit about our next fundraising goal and what that means to go into the next phase. And so with that, hello to the folks in the chat. You're right. We don't know whether it is going to be a rain day or a snow day this time of year. But I imagine this may be the end of the snow, but who knows?
We'll see. Yeah, I think this question about the theory and zooming out about legislative policy and legislative politics and how it relates to the broader social movement is a really interesting one. And I kind of think back about phases of my own relationship to legislation and the government process, kind of earlier in my activism, Occupy and other things, thinking that I was very far removed from the legislative process and, more recently passing a bill and kind of coming to the other extreme of like, okay, what's possible? What compromises have to be made? Which lobbyists do I have to call and yell at? That kind of thing. And now, what we've been working out, and you've been doing a lot of the theoretical work on this, Andy, isn't really one place or the other, right? It really encompasses a wide range of tactics and communications strategy. So could you expand on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so let me start by saying part of what spurred me to want to talk about this tonight is a long time and very successful and very prominent Green, Ben Mansky, was asking a question this week about the UK Greens. The Greens in the UK are suddenly in a position to take a leadership position in a lot of places and not just win a couple of seats. I think it's going to go very quickly from winning some seats and getting some prominence to potentially having governing majorities in a lot of major cities in the UK. And so what Ben was asking was this question about how do American Greens think about governing as a Green, as somebody outside of the two-party system.
And if I could just break in there, I mean, what's really amazing here is that the UK was pretty much a two-party system for a long time, and now there's like a 4 or 5 party system, right? I mean, it's really only in the last couple of decades that has happened. And so this idea that the US is a two-party system, will always be a two-party system, it's like, says who? Look at what's happening in the UK.
Yeah, and so a lot of time we've spent on this campaign talking about how we're not going to win, we're not going to have to be in that position, and that's still probably the reality of this race, right? But at the same time, I think the question that Ben poses about how would we govern if we were to win the positions that we're running for is a really interesting and really thought-provoking one, and I think we can dive into it a little bit tonight as it relates to this question of legislative work. And so I think if you've heard the show, you've seen our email, you've seen our social media, we've done a ton of work this year in Annapolis. And part of the reason that I've been there so much is because we are running first and foremost against a two-party system to expand a multi-party system and to counter the effects of money in politics. And so I thought that there's during this 90-day legislative session where all the laws in the state of Maryland get made for the course of the year, and really that's really about 45 days where that actually happens, right? Given the other processes, I thought it was really good to go sit and regularly observe the committee that talks about elections, that talks about multi-party democracy, and talks about money in politics. And we've provided a lot of testimony on that. We've worked with lawmakers, we've worked with lobbyists and advocates. And what I've seen is that it's very hard to make things move quickly when there's a supermajority party that isn't that worried about losing its seats, and when all of the lawmaking has to happen in about a 70-day period once every year. Now, you add in the fact that people are reluctant to change election law and election years, and that we have elections every 2 years in the state of Maryland, and suddenly you understand why it is very difficult for us to make meaningful changes to elections, to money and politics and things like that, and why it is such a fraught process. Because again, at the end of the day, the people who are making those decisions are benefiting just fine from the system that exists right now. It is what got them elected, it's what funds their campaigns, and it's what gets them into power. And I think if we want to change that system, we have to have good critiques, we have to have good theory, we have to have snappy graphics, but we also have to have an understanding of how we make that process work differently, how we challenge the electoral systems that we have, how we challenge the campaign finance systems that we have, and how we constructively build to get something different. Now, I'm not naive. I don't think that anything we do is going to quickly turn Maryland into a multi-party democracy that is entirely funded by public elections. But if that is the goal that we are pursuing, then we have to figure out what the structural barriers are and what the political barriers are in order to get there. So, that I think is why I've been spending so much time there this year. If that is the end goal, we have to understand what is stopping good ideas from getting implemented, how we can implement them, and what we have to change and influence in order for that to happen, if not this year, in the future.
Yeah, it'd be a real sea change, and it's exciting to see it, starting to move the high water mark on some of the individual pieces of legislation that we've been supporting or even getting introduced, but also the broader recognition that, hey, this is a multi-party system. If we make it a multi-party system, right, it's up to Greens and other third-party folks to embody our place in this political order.
Yeah, and I think there's a really interesting way that professor who we had on our live stream in 2024, Jack Santucci, phrases this. What he says is that electoral reform doesn't create strong third parties. Strong third parties create electoral reform, right? And I think what he's hinting at is that the people who are in power don't have an incentive without pressure from the outside in order to change the rules of the game. The two parties are relatively content with the rules of the game because they each have a role in it and they can each do their thing in it. And I think what Santucci's argument there is that's really useful to think about is we don't get the changes we want as a result of them magnanimously deciding to change it for us. We get the changes we want by building the kind of pressure that makes it so that it is a good political calculation for them to change the rules, not out of sort of benevolence or out of, hope for a better political system.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful reframe. We often think about electoral reform as kind of moderate good governance work, and often there's a lot more at play. And often it's pressure from the wings, from the fringes, right, that
Yeah.
is making the change. So yeah, let's dig into that a little bit more. I mean, how can more radical political formations engage with the legislative process?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think a good example of how this can work is our friends at Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. We have worked with them on a lot of issues. Lawrence Grand Prix came on the show earlier. Davon Love will come on the show later, and they come from an independent Black nationalist and Black radical position, and they believe that the legislative process is a core means of advancing that project. And there's a couple ways that they do it, I think, that we are learning from. And if you look at bills that they're working on this year, there's a couple things that I think there's two sort of modes of how they interact with this. One is something like auto charging youth as adults, which we will talk about later. There has been an effort to stop that process in Maryland for 15 years at this point. And they have recently joined that effort and used the force of their community connections in order to push it in a different direction. I think there's another path that they take as well, and that path is to introduce things that would not otherwise be up for discussion if it weren't for them being there. So
Mhm.
yesterday, HB 1271, which is part of the reparations platform that they have and that we advocate, which would take organizations like Hopkins that have really large endowments and use a chunk of their endowments that have been derived from enslavement. The original foundation of the organization of the institution was derived from enslavement. And so they take some of the endowments from those organizations and help to use them in order to fund the type of reparations that would allow the communities, oftentimes surrounding those areas, to be able to thrive, to have the repair that they need and that type of thing. And that goes well with the concept that we talked about when we had Professor DeVarian Baldwin come on the show a little while ago about how universities can be part of the solution to the problem, but it takes governments pushing them to do that. And I say that to say that that bill, HB 1271, sponsored by Delegate Ruff and others, that goes after Hopkins Endowment as part of the means of funding reparations, would never have existed if LBS wasn't there pushing it. So we have these sort of two modes, I think, that they show us. One is jumping onto a bill that is not making progress and helping to get it across the finish line. And the other one is introducing something that wouldn't be there without the more radical presence there. Now, is HB 1271 to this reparations fund, is it going to pass this year? Probably not. But part of the process is introducing the idea so that folks can be able to start developing it and it can go into future years. And I think we did that with two of the bills that we worked on this year. HB 101, which is that debate bill that we've talked a lot about, wouldn't be there without us. It's the first time it's been introduced in Maryland. It's the first time really it's been introduced anywhere that I know of around the country. And HB 979, which is the Constitutional Convention bill that I testified on this week, also wouldn't be there without us. Those were two instances where we learned from LBS that if we go to a lawmaker and say, we want you to put this bill in, we think it's an interesting part of the conversation, it gets injected into the conversation and it changes the process. And I think those are two good examples of ways that we're starting to see how other folks are successfully using this.
Yeah, and it doesn't just change the conversation in Annapolis or in the legislature. The Hopkins endowment, or the bill to distribute funds from endowments with more than $2 billion, right, which is Hopkins and maybe a couple others. That's having an active effect on the ground in District 41, in the state Senate race that's happening there. People are talking about it in the hyper local media there. So it is creating political education opportunities. It is creating contrasts between local politicians and voting blocks. And I think, the same thing with the bills that we're working on. This isn't just a theatrical effort for this small group of lawmakers and their staffs, right? But it is a way that we can get the message about grassroots democracy out from Western Maryland to the Eastern Shore and all across the state, and talk about the Maryland we deserve and the electoral system that we deserve.
Yeah, totally. And I think that LBS is certainly not the only person that is using this effectively. Yesterday, there was a hearing on a bill that would repeal the boycott, divestment, and sanction ban in Maryland. This is another example of a radical proposal using the legislative process in order to push an agenda forward and push a conversation forward. And I think we need to be looking for partnerships on things like this when we're outside as a means of building power, and use these lessons that we can see from effective legislative pushes to think about not just how to change the conversation, but to use that change of the conversation in order to eventually change outcomes in line with those values. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about changing the outcomes so that we are having a different world than we have right now. And, it's easy enough to say, I don't do electoralism, I don't do policy, I just do mutual aid, I just do direct action. And that is important, and I think it is necessary, but I also think there needs to be an arm of radical organizing efforts that do use legislative, legal, and electoral processes in order to put the question in front of people in ways that they're paying attention.
Yeah, I think having an all of the above strategy is really important. I think when I worked for School of the America's Watch, right, we did direct action, we did arts-based organizing and activism, and we had a bill that was in the U.S. Congress that was a rallying point for people to contest power and talk about a more just and peaceful world, and apply pressure to the U.S. military, right? So I think these things are certainly not mutually exclusive. No one person can do everything, but all of us can do something, and we don't need to divide ourselves along lines of tactics or tone necessarily. And it can be exhausting. I'm pretty exhausted right now. I've been doing some mutual aid stuff for the last 5 or so months. That is a little bit lighter now than it has been. But we have to do all these things as much as we can,
Yep, and I think we need to think about how we can do all of these things in the most strategic way possible, because it is not just virtue signaling, right? We don't want to just put in a bill just to be able to say we put in that bill, and there's no possibility of it doing anything, and everybody knows that, right? We want to think about how to use these things strategically in order to get different outcomes, even if not right now, eventually.
Right. Yeah. And I think, we can learn from LBS on that, and we can look at the example of Greens in Canada or Greens in the UK. Greens in Germany are winning more seats, right? The traditional center left in a lot of places is looking pretty wobbly, and whether it's because of scandal or because of failed policies, because of hypocritical stances on international relations. A lot of these
they've given up on the people as the center of their organizing, and put corporations in power as the center of their organizing, and people are starting to realize the consequences of not being at the center of the party that is supposed to work for them.
Yeah. And I bet if you read some of these interviews with the Greens in the UK, they're like, we have a system that's built, internal infrastructure for our party, which is built for about a third of the size that we've grown to in the past year, right? But having that structure there to receive the energy as people abandon labor, and in some cases probably abandon some of the other parties, because they see the UK Greens as the future, right? If the UK Greens hadn't been there, there would have been no electoral expression of that dissatisfaction with the status quo, and what a
I
missed
mean,
opportunity that would have been.
I think the one thing I will say is the other electoral expression that Greens in the UK are competing at large scale with at this point is Reform, which
Yeah,
is the far right party, and they are also tapping into the same sentiments of anger against the system. And I think there is a value here in thinking about the way that building this left radical infrastructure is part of stopping the radical right populist infrastructure from taking over, because that is the path that things are going when people opt out of the current system right now. And so it is not just building for ourselves, it is an anti-fascist effort to build these left populist grassroots independent solutions, not just as a counter to the sort of neoliberal democratic centrists, but also as a counter to the far right.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most succinct and eloquent ways of expressing the why do you guys yell at and shake your fists at Democrats all the time? It's like, actually, no, like it's it's not about left versus center left. It's left versus right, and if the center left isn't delivering, then folks are going to go to the populist right, and
Right. And I
that
think
is really dangerous.
I think a lot of people in the center left, the Democratic Party here or Labour in the UK, think that the people who vote for them would never go to the populist right. And I think that has been shown wrong here. I think it's been shown wrong in the UK. And as long as they make themselves the only alternative to that, if that alternative is not good, it is a pathway to the progressive right, or to the populist right. And I think we need to make sure we're building the institutional framework to stop that from happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is really, this is a little bit of a tangent. We hadn't planned to talk so much about the UK, but I mean, it's really wild to see Starmer using the same talking points of, the Clinton campaign and the Biden campaign and the Harris campaign of, a vote for the Greens is a vote for the far right. And people in the UK are just ignoring it and voting for what they want and winning.
Yeah,
So,
and it's like we're not where they are yet, but it doesn't. What I think the story of the UK Greens tells us is that once we start getting there, it will come much quicker than we thought it would, and we need to be ready to govern and to think about what that looks like for when it does come.
yeah, yeah. So that kind of leads to this question of what would our approach in office be, right? And the importance of theorizing that and imagining that, because in a not too distant future, it could be possible.
Yeah, and so the way that I look at this, I think there's a lot of people in the General Assembly and who do work in the General Assembly who are really upset with Governor Westmore based on the way that he has interacted with the legislative branch. He is not very present with them. He's not working on a lot of the bills. He's showing up for some showy testimony. And sure, he's got a team of folks working on things, but you can read reports all over the place that say that the relationship is broken down. The lawmakers are upset that the governor is not working with them, is not engaging with them. And I think that's a good contrast to how we would work. If I was the governor in 2027, we would be in Annapolis in the building every single day of the legislative session. We would have a powerful advocate assigned to pushing a big agenda in every one of the committees. And we would work with the General Assembly to move fast and do big things so that we could take advantage of the 90 days that we have while we're in Annapolis in order to really deliver for the people of Maryland. A 90-day legislative session is designed to be a break on moving quickly. And so the party in power is really excited to have a break on moving quickly because they don't need to do that in order to stay in power. And moving quickly and doing big things exposes them in a way that moving slow and proddingly doesn't. So If we were there, we would not be doing national television during the legislative session. We would not be traveling to fundraisers in other states. We would not be talking about candidates in other states. We would be in the building working with the advocates and the legislators in order to put a big agenda on the table, get it passed, and do big things and move quickly. And I think that is a contrast that is appealing both to the people who work in the General Assembly, but also appealing to the people who never go to Annapolis for a session and are upset at how slow and ploddingly things like this seem to move, when they oftentimes seem like common sense. Like, it will take years and years, I believe, for the teachers and the librarians to get the right to strike. Maybe 4 or 5 years in order to do that. It took 14 years in order to get a bill past the Senate that changed this auto charging of youth as adults type of thing. And that is unacceptable when people are facing real crisis right now, and one party has the power in order to push whatever agenda they want. So if we're in office next year, we're going to work really hard with both Democrats, Republicans in the General Assembly, with advocates, but also with the people, in order to make sure that each one of those committees is pushing a big and fast agenda that gets things done that are important and that changes outcomes in a meaningful way for the people of the state of Maryland.
Yeah, I think it would be, really exciting also to, welcome the people into, the state house and governor's mansion, and have a different relationship with the grassroots too. And I think there can be some opportunities for triangulation there, and not just kind of showing up for photo ops and that sort of thing, but having kind of deeper listening sessions, fireside chats, all of that. Some of that is just.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Some of that's just bread and butter of progressive governance, and we don't really see it the way we should. And it's all very, very orchestrated and buttoned down.
Yeah, the BTU, the Baltimore Teachers Union, yesterday had busloads of students from Baltimore City joining them for the right to strike rally, and then joining them in the General Assembly talking to lawmakers. And that is the type of thing that we would do on the regular. We would make sure that the people were there, and that there was an mediating group of organizations, advocates, and staffers in order to try to make that happen. And I think that type of thing is what we would need to push that big agenda, that is really, progressive and green radical agenda, that is about ecology, that is about democracy, that is about justice, and is about a solidarity economy. We need the people there telling the legislators that they can't go this slow, and that it's time to move fast, and it's time to do big things. And so, that's what it would look like if we were there. We would probably have conflict with the General Assembly too, because we're not of the party of any of the members there. But we're not going to treat them as people who we expect to do our bidding. We're not going to treat them as junior partners. We're going to work with them in order to pass a big agenda to move fast. And, it might be, if we get elected, it is probably unlikely that we're going to get reelected. So we don't need to worry about reelection. We need to worry about delivering for the people of Maryland so that they can move forward and have a better system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine both a relationship of respect and productivity, and us organizing a march on Annapolis, right? Both things can be true. And, maybe some legislative allies get invited to speak at the march, right? But I think both approaches would be really exciting. So a lot to do there with developing our political imagination. A lot of lessons to be learned by organizations that are doing some of this work now, and movements around the world that are cresting and reaching success, even despite all that we're up against globally. So that might be a place to kind of leave it for this segment on our approach to our legislative work, and kind of go into the weeds a little bit more with our week in review segment. So you mentioned auto charging earlier. Explain first of all, what is our auto charging, and then what is this bill that you testified on, SB 323?
Yeah, so the practice of auto charging in the state of Maryland is certain crimes that certain people, the young people of certain ages are charged with, are automatically charged in the adult system. And when they are charged in the adult system, the young people are kept in adult facilities, and they're facing an adult judge. A lot of those cases get sent back down to juvenile court anyway, after a young person has spent a tremendous amount of traumatic time in an adult facility. And there's really good data and research on this that says that young people spending time in adult facilities is absolutely devastating to young people. It's bad for adults too, but it's particularly bad for young people, and it does nothing in order to help with whatever the issue is. And so many of them get sent back down anyway. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of kids who have been traumatized over the years in significant ways by being placed into adult systems. So this has been an issue that has been going on for a long time in the state of Maryland, and there's been bills on it regularly. This year, SB 323 is a bill that takes some of those block of charges that young people are charged with, auto charged as adults with, and shifts them back to the juvenile court. Now, I think it's important to understand here that at any point, if a judge thinks that a young person needs to be sent up to the adult court, they can always do that from the juvenile court, but it is a question of where they start and how the young person is treated while they're waiting for the judicial process to happen. So this bill passed. It had a couple things in it that a couple of categories of charges that I think hopefully will get negotiated out of, there are a couple things I think like carjacking and robbery that they had wanted to shift away from auto charging, that were kept in the Senate bill as things that the House bill is hopefully going to be able to try to work out, so that those charges don't apply to young people. We'll have Davon Love on in a couple of weeks. He's busy working this bill with Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle and other folks. But I think it's important to know that this bill is moving for the first time, and it is a pretty significant effort in Maryland to have it move. Maryland, I think, has the second highest number of young people incarcerated in adult facilities, only after Alabama, of any place in the country. And it is a thing that we need to fix. And it is a thing that people have been trying to fix for a very long time. And it's starting to get some movement. The next 20 days, 30 days or so will determine how that bill gets passed. But it is important to know that this is a big issue for the rights of young people and for the human rights of young people who are charged in this state. And it is overwhelmingly Black youth who have this happen. And so I think this is a good piece of legislation. We'll do a whole show about juvenile justice and what that means with after our break. But that's moving this week, and it's good on the advocates for getting it moving. It's been a long time waiting, and it's an important bill.
Yeah, good. Obviously, something that would really impact a lot of young people's lives in a positive way. So let's get that passed, and let's get the strongest version that we can. So you also did some testifying or advocacy work around some education policies, right, Andy?
Yeah, so we mentioned last week that there was a bill for a $25 wage for school support professionals. I think there's about 40,000 school support professionals in the state right now, and a decent chunk of them make under $25 an hour. That is not a living wage in almost any part of Maryland. And these are the folks who make the school run, who drive the kids, who serve the meals, who clean the buildings, who provide support, and some of them are instructional support. There are a lot of folks who provide a lot of roles other than teacher and student in the school, and they deserve the kind of wage that allows them to make a living. There was a survey, I believe, by MSEA last year, by the State Teachers Union, that said that 80% of the people in that role felt like they needed to have a second job in order to keep that role. And, you can make more at Costco than you can teaching a student to read in a Baltimore City school in a lot of cases, and that's wrong. And so Maryland would be the first state in the country to set a floor for educational support professionals and a minimum wage for them. And this is one of those cases where Maryland should be in the lead of setting the national standard and showing people what it looks like to treat educational workers with the dignity they deserve. Is $25 enough? No, that's probably already a compromised position in order to get something done. But it is an essential piece of work that a lot of the unions and a lot of the educators are supporting right now because it needs to happen. And it is also, a core part of our platform is to make sure that the people working in schools have the wages. I think we have the sixth highest wage right now. I think we have like the sixth highest wage for teachers right now. It's not enough, but it's better than it is in many other states. But our educational support professionals have, like, I believe, a middle of the pack, 25th or 30th in salary, and we can't leave them behind as we're trying to make this effort to improve our public education system. So that bill was heard this week in the House. We provided testimony on it. It's up on our newsletter site. You can go see it. I think it's important stuff, and I think it is one of those things that shouldn't be that hard to get done, but does require significant work based on the way that our government in Annapolis works.
Yeah. No, I spent most of my career as a teacher in adult education, but I've worked in after-school programs, and I was a sub in Baltimore City schools at one point, and I saw the work that these folks do with the students, and it's really skilled work, and it's hard work, and they certainly deserve at least $25 an hour, if not more.
Yep. And the rural counties, this is especially the case. I think 70% in some of the Eastern Shore and Western Maryland counties are under this wage. And I think this bill, as it is constituted right now, puts the burden on the local counties and the local school systems to pay it. And it should. They're the employers there. But I think one of the things that we will look at supporting in the future is making sure that those counties have the funds that they need and don't get things shifted to them so that they're not put in a position where they can't afford to pay that prevailing wage, And so right now we think they can afford it, but we think if I'm the governor and you're the lieutenant governor and the counties come to us and they say, we need some help with this in order to pay that wage, we're going to make sure that they get that help so that they can pay that wage. There's been a lot of costs shifted to counties and the more budgets over the last couple of years, especially education costs. And we need to make sure that our poorer counties have the resources they need in order to pay people just the same. That's not a reason not to support this bill. And I want to be clear when I say that what we are talking about is a future situation where it may be necessary to provide support for those counties that want to meet that requirement. Not a reason to not support this bill, but a reason to think down the road about what we do if some of those counties need help paying people extra.
Yeah. And they'll need help because the Moore administration has shifted all of these costs to them over, the last few years, not just because of any one piece of legislation. So
right.
I think that
it is because the Moore administration does not want to raise taxes on wealthy people, and they're switching, and corporations, so they're pushing the burden on the counties so that they can say that they are balancing budgets. But it is really county governments, that are paying, county governments and taxpayers that are paying the price for that.
Yeah. And so you talked a little bit before about right to strike, but this is another piece of legislation. I mean, you said, you could imagine it taking years. I feel like it's taken 9 decades to get to this point for the right to strike.
For the fact for there to be a bill introduced, I think is really important. And it may happen this year. It could be that in an election year where the teachers unions have backed the governor and have backed a lot of other folks, it could be that this is a year where this thing moves and it moves quickly. But the bill that was introduced yesterday would provide right to strike for public school workers and for librarians. And that's a start on the public sector workers. It needs to be all of the public sector workers. But look, this to me is an easy one. If workers don't have the right to strike, any promise that is made in legislation or any promise that is made in a negotiation is as good as the management who is offering it and how long they're going to commit to it. There have been instances where contracts have been voided or disregarded by county governments and by state government in these things, and it is because the workers don't have the right to strike. When education workers have the right to strike, the strikes are usually very quick because people understand how important they are, and it is a negotiating tactic that keeps both sides honest, I think. I think one of the things that the educators and the librarians were emphasizing yesterday is they don't have any desire to go out on a strike, but they want the full toolkit of labor organizing in order to be able to keep both sides honest at the negotiating table. And to me, this feels like one of those things that shouldn't be hard, but it is hard. And we hope that it gets passed this year. As we have said in the past, if we are in office next year and this bill, we will tell the General Assembly that this has to come to our desk, or we will veto everything else that they send to us, because it's essential that our public sector workers have the right to be able to do what they need to do in order to fairly negotiate their contract, their working conditions, and their wages.
Yeah. I think it also has the potential to alter the relationship between laborers and organized labor organizations, right? I think when workers don't have the legal ability to withhold their labor, and it's not just, oh, you can't go on strike, right? It's that if you go on strike, your union can be deleted. I think it really positions unions as intermediaries, as almost another layer of management, if they're not really, really diligent to not be that, right? And if they're not really, really intentional about being accountable to the base of their membership. And so the right to strike also gives rank and file activists power relative to the union brass. And I think that is one of the reasons why it's taken so long.
Yeah.
It's not just the politicians, it's also some of the more comfortable institutional unions or their leadership like being the negotiators first and foremost, and will show up on a picket line if some private sector union is actually out on strike withholding their labor, but is a little bit wary of the power that that a rank and file member who can make the case through some of the debate or rhetoric tactics that we were discussing on the show last week, to their fellow members that, hey, withholding our labor is the way to get what we want, not a more convincing negotiating stance or contract implementation and enforcement.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's not just the union that threatens decertification in the current system. Teachers can lose their credential to teach in the state of Maryland if they are involved in a labor action like this, or even threatening this, right? And that is threatening somebody's professional livelihood for, and I mean, there was some testimony yesterday that said, like, working to their contract, even a work slowdown that says we're going to stop doing the extra work that most teachers do, or many librarians do, and working to their contract could be interpreted as a threat to a work slowdown, to a work stoppage, and could allow retaliation against anybody who allowed it. That is just a ridiculous condition that should not exist, and it should not be something our public sector workers have to deal with as they are trying to do the work of the government. We need that they have to have these rights. It is the complete part. It completes the bargaining package, and without it, literally one hand is tied behind their back, and their jobs are threatened if they use their labor power.
Yeah, absolutely. So another piece of education legislation that we've been talking about on the show for a while is sort of it's a Dream Act 2.0. I'm wearing my blue T-shirt from the 2012 march from Langley Park to College Park when we won the Dream Act for the first time. But it's been a while. I mean, it's been 14 years, and so there were some compromises that were made then that need to be addressed now, especially given the federal government's campaign of terror against immigrant communities. But there's also some pieces which are just plain outdated, right? So let's talk about the Dream Act update.
Yeah, so I think this one better than I do. I talked to you and I talked to some of the advocates about it, but I know that you know the ins and outs of the intricate details of it. So why don't you talk about what the bill does, what it addresses, and what you think still is left on the table?
Yeah. So currently, if a student who is undocumented wants to get in-state tuition at a public university or a community college, they are held to a different standard, even if they went to high school here, than a student who is a permanent resident green card holder or U.S. citizen. And one of the ways is years of residency as demonstrated through tax returns by themselves or their parent or guardian. And so they have to show 3 years of tax returns, which regardless of the injustice of 3 years compared to, in some cases, you can move to a county and 3 months later, if you're a citizen, you're paying in-county tuition at the community college. So 3 years versus 3 months, that's unjust. But also just like the administrative burden on working class families. If you move, if you don't save your tax returns from years ago, as many people do not, it creates a real hurdle. So obviously the bill was historic. I think when it passed in 2012, we assumed that it was, there was a version in Texas, actually. I mean, it really shows how much the immigration debate has been radicalized and weaponized by the far right, because Texas had a similar piece of legislation. Maryland passed it. There's only a few other states that have it. I mean, it's not one of these things that swept the country and all the blue states adopted it. And so, Maryland was fairly bold on this. But so the current law addresses that piece of it, that removing the 3 years of tax return. That's a huge barrier removal. But there's all these other little pieces of it which create additional hoops that students have to jump through and their families have to jump through. And some of them were modeled off of the FAFSA, federal financial aid legislation and form, which has been updated a couple times since 2012. And those same updates haven't been reflected in the Dream Act. And one of those pieces that I kind of latched onto as problematic and talked to people who were working these bills about was the selective service component, right? So this kind of came out of the abolishing the draft after the Vietnam War, and there's still this selective service where male residents, regardless of citizenship status, have to pledge their willingness to fight if the draft is reinstated, fight for the U.S. military if the draft is reinstated. And it's like a paper form that you fill out. But in 2020, as part of a omnibus kind of COVID relief package, the FAFSA Simplification Act at the federal level did away with the provision that students would have to attest to filling out their selective service card. because like so many of these other things, voter ID and so forth, the burden of documentation is hardest for working class folks. And so the even at the federal level, they realized that 11% of U.S. Men hadn't filled out the selective service card, and in requiring them to do so as a condition of getting financial aid wasn't actually making rates of participation go up. So they got rid of that. And more recently, there was work in one of the legislative work at the federal level in one of the National Defense Act reauthorization omnibus bills that automated selective service. So it's not this, paper card based, but it's just you turn 18, they have a record of you, and they enroll you. And so in two ways, even this new DREAM Act update is outdated and puts burdens on undocumented students that no longer fall on students with permanent status. So I think it's great. It's one of those things where it's great that this reform is happening. It needs to happen. The tax return, threshold is ridiculous, but that's not the only piece that's excluding students. I mean, I've talked to students and their families who are very distrustful of filling out a form and sending their name and address to any part of the federal government, including the military, including the Selective Service Administration, saying, yeah, I'm here, I'm 18, in order to get in-state tuition. I mean, it just doesn't add up financially. It's not worth the risk given who's running the federal government. So, yeah.
And this is one of those bills that feels like it is going to be hard to get done this year, should not be hard to get done, should not be subject to a 90-day process that only occurs every 4 years, in which people don't want to take any bold positions in election years, and should not require people to drive down to Annapolis, and desperately hope they can lobby their legislators to make it important enough that they pay attention to, And I think it's like a lot of these processes, a lot of the small things that the legislature, seemingly small things that the legislature has to do, just seems so difficult to get done that it feels almost impossible to do the big things when this is a multi-year lift in order to make it so that students don't have to have this huge administrative burden that doesn't make any sense. Maybe made sense in 2012, but certainly doesn't make sense today. And so I think that is our general critique of this system, is that it benefits the people in power to allow things to go slow and to make things be small. And we need a legislative process that is open to the people and has politicians pushing it. They want to go fast and do big things in order to change people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So yeah, it was a busy week, wasn't it? We do need a spring break.
Hey, let's talk about Palestine. Let's push. We can talk more about education stuff after spring break, I think.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the Palestine stuff a little bit for this week too. So so a couple things that happened on Israel and Palestine this week that are important in the General Assembly. And this is an issue that we've covered extensively. We put out a platform for how Maryland can stop being involved in supporting genocide and supporting apartheid. And it's been an issue that we've been on top of for a long time. But this week in the General Assembly, there were a couple of important bills. There was an anti-genocide resolution offered by Delegate Gabe Acevedo that was heard on Monday. And this is just a resolution that would say that this body stands against genocide in the Congo and in the Congo and Sudan and in Gaza. And it was good testimony from a lot of folks who were pointing out that the state of Maryland should take a position that does not align itself with that aligns itself against these genocides. Again, this is just a resolution. This is literally just the General Assembly saying that they believe in this position. Now, I don't know that it's going to go anywhere. It's not the type of thing that they want to do in an election year. But it is important that it gets brought up, and it's an important opportunity for good testimony to go on the record and for people to be able to look their lawmakers in the eye and say, are you going to stand against genocide, or are you going to put this in the shelf? So good work to Delegate Acevedo and the folks that do that. And I also think it's important to understand that the people who are opposed to the genocide in Gaza are opposed to what is happening in Congo and are opposed to what is happening in Sudan, and oftentimes are opposed to the way that nuclear weapons are used in order to threaten people around the world, and that militarism and violence are used to solve problems. So good work on Delegate Acevedo for putting that forward and challenging people on that question. I think it's important to challenge folks, even if they're going to not take it up, to make them be faced with the question and then to use their position on that question later.
Yeah, I think it's really timely. I mean, the ongoing attacks, not just in Gaza, but in Lebanon and
Right.
Iran, right? I mean, it is really brutal, and Israel needs to be pressured.
Yeah. And then also this week, there was a bill that was heard, sponsored by Delegate Kaylin Young, who's my delegate. And Delegate Young's bill would repeal the executive order from 2017 that made state contractors pledge that they were not going to boycott Israel. And Delegate Young's argument on this is that signing a document that says, I will not boycott Israel under penalty of perjury, according to the document that you have to sign in order to contract with Maryland, that is coerced political speech, that is a violation of the First Amendment, and that Maryland should not be in the business of coercing people's political speech in order to determine whether they can contract with the state. So I submitted written testimony on this piece. We've been pretty clear where we stand on BDS. We think that it is a nonviolent means of putting pressure on Israel. We think the government of Maryland should repeal that executive order that has bipartisan support at this point. But Delegate Young's bill is the first bill that has come up since 2017 in order to do this work. And if it passes, it would be the first bill in the country to repeal an executive order that was put in by conservative pro-Israel forces. And so it's really important work. And many of the same people who were testifying there on Monday were again there on Wednesday testifying on this. And it is important to raise the constitutional question, to push people to take on the question they don't want to take on. For all the reasons that the people don't want to take on the resolution that says they're against genocide, no contractor who wants to contract with the state of Maryland should have to engage in that debate either. It's not good for their business to have to be engaged in that debate. It's not relevant to their business. I put in testimony that said, as a potential technology contractor that might, when we're done with this race, like to provide services to the state of Maryland, I will not sign a document that says I wouldn't boycott Israel. And especially the way that it is written, I would not be allowed to boycott any business that came out of the West Bank or out of the illegally occupied settlements in the West Bank, because the way that the executive order is written, it says that Israel and its territories and businesses located in Israel and its territories cannot be boycotted. So we would not be able to say, I will not use a vendor who operates an illegally and internationally recognized violations of international law in the West Bank. And that's ridiculous. It has nothing to do with contracting in Maryland. Procurement should be about whether the contractor is responsive to the bid and responsible in order to get the work done. And we should not have political litmus tests and coerced political speech on procurement contracts in order to satisfy political donors and political voices in the state, the nation, and the world.
Yeah. And I'll just point out the reason, it was Governor Hogan, I think we've said it before on the show, it was Governor Hogan who signed this executive order. And on the campaign trail, Governor Moore pledged he would keep it in place. And the reason it's an executive order instead of a law is because the Freedom to Boycott Coalition and the Maryland for BDS coalition successfully beat back attempts to pass this through the legislature, and it did not have popular support. It did not have Democratic support. It did not have majority support. And so Governor Hogan took the route that he took, and Governor Moore has upheld it. So I think it's really important that, we understand that movement history, and that's how we got here. And so, yeah, I hope that bill moves forward as well.
And there's some really interesting research that I found in the process of doing the testimony for it that says that they found documents in Louisiana where the Israeli government and national American organizations were directly editing the document, putting pressure on the governor to sign the executive order there. And what it opened up for me was a question of whether Governor Hogan had done that. And I guess the conclusion that I came to was I want to look and see if maybe we can submit a Maryland Public Information Act request on that for those records to see if we can find out if Governor Hogan was working with the same organizations, because ALEC, which is a conservative think tank, was working with all of the governors at the time in order to get this passed. And it seems likely that if the legislation and the language was very similar in Maryland to the legislation and language in Louisiana, that it is probably true that Governor Hogan was also working with those national and international forces. And look, whatever one thinks about Israel and Palestine, we're pretty clear where we stand on it. But if our governor is using a foreign government's influence to override the will of our assembly in order to pass an executive order, that should trouble people, even if they don't share our position on Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so one more topic on this, and then we'll breathe a bit. So next week, one of the last bills that's going to get heard in this session of the General Assembly is a bill called Break the Bonds. And this is going to require divestment of Maryland retirement and pension funds from Israeli companies and Israeli bonds. And this is an issue that we've talked about on the show multiple times. We're very excited to see this go forward. Divestment is a big part of our platform. And it is just simply another one of these things where the state of Maryland has no business for political purposes investing in like dangerous Israeli bonds and putting teachers, firefighters, government workers, pension and retirement funds in there. And again, for political reasons connected to support of Israel, not for financial or fiduciary reasons. We have this. And so this bill next week, which will be coming up, is part of a movement that folks have been working on for a while in order to cause a very specific divestment. And, divestment along with boycott is part of a decades-long strategy of using nonviolent means in order to pressure Israel to stop engaging in genocide in Gaza and to stop engaging in apartheid in the West Bank and to stop conducting wars against every other country in the region. And so we are going to be supportive of that. All of these things are part of our platform. And there are people doing great work on it. We support those folks, and we want to see this bill pass as well.
Yeah, they've got a great zine too. You can check out their zine. I think their website is like Break the Bonds MD. So check out their zine, and you can print it and distribute it.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I want to say in these two sections is that there are a lot of pieces of legislation that align with our green platform that already get proposed in Annapolis. And we don't need a whole new set of ideas. We need the political power to get the right things done and to get them done in a way that is timely and works. And I think that it is really important for folks to understand when we think about governing, it can't just be we're going to come in and do whole new things that haven't been done before. Some of that we do need to do. But other pieces of this are making sure that good legislation that is proposed by people and parties other than ours has an opportunity to get across the finish line in order to deliver the goods for the people of Maryland. And so, we will continue to push legislation that wouldn't come if it weren't for us, but we will also continue to support legislation regardless of the party of the person who sponsored it, if it is good for the people of Maryland.
Right on, right on.
Okay. Whew. That was a lot. So we'll pick up on the education platform next week. I encourage folks to go check it out. We're pretty excited about this. We think it's the beginning of a conversation. Last week we talked about a couple of the pieces of it. There's a couple of other pieces in there about multilingual schools, progressive taxation, public banks in order to build out our buildings, expanding student and community governance. And one of the things I'm most interested in talking about is non-school based solutions, homeschooling and independent educational institutions. But I think we should do just a whole big education discussion sometime after spring break, and we should fold this stuff into this. But again, I encourage folks to go check it out, gogreen2026.com/education. You can see our platform there. And as with all pieces of our platform, we encourage folks to share their ideas, to share their feedback, to share criticism, to share articles, all of that different stuff. It's all important, and it is all about how we co-create this together so that we can put together the kind of education platform that draws on the things that are working, that draws on the things that advocates, labor, and students are talking about, and draws on ideas that come from the Green Party platform. So we'll talk more about it after spring break, but I think it's a good document, and I'm proud of our work on it.
Yeah, and I'll just say, it was kind of a labor of love, right? I mean, we've been working on this since at least October, and there are areas of policy that we're conversing in, and we did deep dives in, and we talked to smart people about it, and we churned something out in a few weeks or maybe a month or two. And this, because education is consistently a priority for Marylanders, and because both of us have worked in schools, worked in different educational contexts, we really wanted to get this right. So I'm excited to hear what people think of it. This is very near and dear to our hearts. And, Maryland students and educators deserve better than what we're getting. And this is a platform plank that can help us get there.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that it is such a struggle to put this out is that so many of the systems and problems that affect our schools are not within our control, even if we were governor and lieutenant governor, in order to be able to fix capitalism, racism, imperialism, colonialism. All of these bigger systems affect what happens in our school in a significant way. And oftentimes education policy is trying to solve those things. And education policy, whether it is about funding or whether it is about labor or whether it is about what happens in the classroom or whether it is about what happens in the community, can't take on the responsibility of solving those things. So part of the reason that I think there was tension and struggle on getting this out is we know that the problem is bigger than any education policy can solve. And we also know that there are education policies that can help significantly improve the outcomes for students, the experience of communities, the working conditions of educators. And so trying to strike that balance between the systems critique and the policy solutions is hard. And it is hard in all the areas, but it's especially hard in this area because for too long, a broken school system has been charged with supporting and fixing a broken society and has been blamed when it is unable to do that. And so I think there's a lot of tension in all of our policy pieces around that, but here particularly. And I think that's a good and fruitful discussion as we move forward on this.
Yeah. And I think last thing I'll say on this is I think there's also, it took a while for us to figure out our orientation towards the blueprint, right? So much really important activist and organizing energy was pulled into this massive multi-decade piece of legislation that's been updated several times, will be updated further, that is this defining feature of education policy in Maryland. And there's a lot of good stuff in there, right? There's a lot left to be desired. There's still things we need to fight for. But I think in a way, having something like a blueprint constrains the imagination to think beyond it, right? And so we were trying to reckon with, to not just be haters on the blueprint, to reckon with its limits and to imagine beyond the blueprint in its current iteration.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on this is Democrats made a promise to students, teachers, educators, and communities about the blueprint. And the question over the next 5 years for the next governor to face is going to be whether they deliver on that promise or whether they force folks to come back to Annapolis every year and beg for the funding that was promised, beg for the program that was promised. I think that that's the path that we're going on right now. I think if Governor Moore wins again, he's shown us that he has a desire to make the teachers unions beg, to make the people with developmental disabilities beg, to make them come and rally in front of his house in order for him to see how much they really care about that. And while I think it's important for them to go rally and to go do that work, I think the question is whether we are approaching this with this is a promise that is made and needs to be kept, or whether we are approaching this with the frame of that was just an idea, and now you got to come beg, and you got to come work, and you got to come scrap, and you got to play this budget Hunger Games thing that Annapolis likes to put people into. We are not going to do that. If we are the next governor and lieutenant governor, we are going to fulfill the promise that was made to teachers, that was made to students, that was made to communities, and what was made to Maryland. And we encourage Governor Moore to make the same commitment, and we encourage the people in the General Assembly to make the same commitment. And when we get on that debate stage and in the fall in order to talk about this, we will demand that he makes that commitment there on the spot. And we will tell all of our teacher and educator friends to watch and make sure to see what he says, not when he's trying to get their endorsement, but when he's talking about what he's really going to do for the next 5 years when the bills start to hit and Maryland has to pay for the promise that it made. We'll pay for it, and we want to make sure that they will as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so we have also have a fundraising goal to announce as well tonight, right?
Yeah, so April 17th is 200 days out from the election. It feels like it is very close, and very soon we're going to be in the election final stretch. So our goal is to raise $10,000 between the start of March and April 17th. We have to do that $250 at a time, and that's not easy. Our opponents get to do that $12,000 at a time. So literally, if our opponents wanted to have $10,000 by April 17th, they could find one person and who was rich and ask them to give $12,000. We have to do it. $250 at a time, and less than that, because many of the people we know can't afford $250 right now. But if we can raise $10,000 between now and April 17th, we are going to take the campaign staff we have right now. We have 3 people who are working for us in very part-time roles. They're helping us with our video, they're helping us with our volunteer organizing, and they're helping us with our messaging. All 3 are very essential things that we need in order to make this campaign run. And if we can have the money, if we can have that cash in hand by April 17th, we're going to expand, we're going to double their hours. We're going to make sure they can spend twice as much time on this as they are right now. And then we're going to rent a bunch of tents and tables and things like that at festivals, fairs, and farmers markets all over the state. And then we're going to start mailing each and every one of the greens in the state. And so it's a pretty tangible goal. it would be a good fundraising goal for us, but it is something that we need to do right now if we want to be able to hit the next part of this campaign. It's been cold outside. We've been in Annapolis. A lot of our work has been focused on this show. All of that stuff is very useful. All of that stuff is very good. But the next phase of this, we got to go all over the state. We got to reach people all over the state, and we got to, we got to be at the St. Mary's Festival and the Cumberland Festival, and we got to be reaching to volunteers across the state. And so, yeah, go to gogreen2026.com/donate, and help us hit that goal. We'll make progress updates on it over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, April 17th, we want to have that money in hand. And then 2 months from now, May 12th, is the day that we have to submit our next campaign finance report. And you heard us maybe say in January that we were beating the Republicans and we were on a path to public financing. That was nice for January. If we got to hit this goal in April in order to make that next bit of progress for May so that we can keep this progression going. The good side of the work that we're doing is we're starting to have success and people are starting to know who we are, and that is starting to raise expectations, and we need to pay for it, and we need help. We need folks from all over the country and all over the state of Maryland to make whatever donation you can. So $5, $20, $250, all of those help us to expand our staff, to go across the state, and to reach Greens across the state.
Yeah, I want to share this cool card. I got a donation from my childhood neighbor in this card today. She's mailed a check, old school, and it's got the evergreen tree on it and says, "Go for it." And she was checking out the website. She likes it. And so thank you to Regina for that. But yeah, whether you've donated already and you can dig a little bit deeper and help us out, or if you haven't donated yet, please, no amount really too small. 250 is the limit, and let's keep this movement moving.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of good Greens across the country have gotten prominent exposure in the last couple of weeks, and that is great. And they've been able to make money. And I hope that we can be one of those Greens that can tap into a nationwide network of folks who appreciate our work and help us to hit these fundraising goals. We opted into the public financing program. And because we opted into the public financing program because we believe in public financing. We believe this is important for small parties. We believe that it is the right way to challenge money in politics. But we opted in to a 48-1 disadvantage to our opponents when it comes to fundraising in the governor's race. And if that is to pay off for us and the idea that we should invest in public financing is going to work for us, then we need to have donations from as many people as we can here in Maryland and across the country, because without it, we're going to feel the real pain of a 48-1 fundraising disadvantage on the tool that we opted into. And we don't want to do that. We want to pay our people. We want to reach Greens, and we want to spend the spring and the summer traveling across the state, bringing this message about the Maryland we all deserve to everybody we can in every corner of the state.
That's right. Well, we get to end with something we like to do on the show, which is take questions from supporters or viewers from all across Maryland. So we have a question from Tina in Upper Marlboro in Prince George's County. And we like this question. So thank you, Tina. And Tina asks, where do you stand on AI data centers and ICE?
Yeah, so in January, we put out a policy that said that we believe that ICE should be abolished and that Maryland should, in cooperation with federal immigration forces, we called on the national government to figure out a way to create a reasonable pathway to legal status for as many people as possible. And we laid out ways that we think our local government should be able to protect our citizens and our residents who are not citizens from a federal government that is operating outside of the control of the Constitution, outside of accountability, and is fulfilling a violent political agenda, and not doing anything to make any communities safer. So our stance on ICE is that it should be abolished, and that Maryland should figure out how to protect its residents from a federal government that is out of control. Our stance on immigration is broader than that. We call on both parties in the federal government to find a solution to the problems that we've hundreds of thousands of people without the documentation and constantly fearing that they are going to be the victims of an overly aggressive federal government. And so that's my take on the ICE part of that. Do you want to add to that, and then we'll take the data?
Yeah, I mean, no ICE new detention centers, no private prisons in Maryland, right? I think that's part of it. No collaboration. So some of these things have been green positions for years and years, and only after really horrific violence do we start to see Democrats in Annapolis implementing them. But yeah, protecting our people, sanctuary for folks from around the world who want to be here, resources, education. It's not just one. I think ICE is very much fixation because it's so violent. And but if we want to think about immigrant justice holistically, the police. The policing force is only the tip of the spear of a pretty oppressive system, and we need to build a pro-immigrant, a pro-human system of government here in Maryland.
Yep, absolutely. And, we have talked about this a lot in relation to ICE, in relation to 287G. We'll talk about it more when we talk about multilingual schools. We talked about it a little bit a couple of weeks ago when we had one of our guests on who talked about what it would look like for a government to serve the people. And so that's the ICE part of it. As far as the AI data centers part of it goes, we attended a rally for some legislation about data centers in Maryland the other day. And I think a lot of that legislation fits into the kind of pattern we've been talking about here. It's good for what can get done, but it feels like it is not fast enough to meet the scale of the problem. Our position is that we would ban hyperscale data centers. We would ban construction of new hyperscale data centers immediately. If there are existing data centers that are on the grid, we would regulate them heavily as they relate to energy, as they relate to water, and as they relate to pollution. And we would make data centers that are we would make data centers that are already there pay for the impacts of the pollution that they have and the cumulative impacts that they have in the communities that they're in. We are not against AI broadly or against those tools, and we've talked about this a lot as well. We think that AI is here and that it is inevitable that it is going to be part of government and society. We think that one of the next pieces of policy that we're going to be working on is what AI regulation looks like, how we protect workers, how we protect privacy, and how we have a thriving technology economy that isn't dependent on the trillion-dollar companies. So one of the things that we do say about data centers that's a little bit different than other folks is we are not against the concept of a building that has servers in it and allows businesses to use those servers in order to serve technology projects. We are against hyperscale data centers that use so much energy and so much water that they are damaging to the world and damaging to the communities that they're in. And what we would suggest replacing them with is small scale, renewable powered data centers that are able to support a technology economy here in Maryland that is not dependent on Oracle, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, or any of those companies. So this is stuff that we're going to be talking a whole lot about over the next couple of weeks. We have some great conversations set up with advocates and experts on this. And in sometime either this month or next month, we'll be releasing a comprehensive AI data security and privacy and data center set of policies that we believe will keep Maryland going forward as a place where technology can work and can innovate, but it is not doing so at the request of the trillion-dollar companies that are getting tax breaks and invitations here in order to build out their infrastructure. If there's going to be infrastructure, it's going to be publicly owned, and it's going to be in the service of the people of Maryland, not in Silicon Valley trillionaires.
Maybe that's a good place to leave it as we head into spring break, right? People over billionaires, people before profit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I said, all of this is stuff that's going to be coming out as our next policy piece. We wanted to get education out. The next policy focus is going to be on AI policy, data center policy, and digital privacy, and how we make sure we protect communities and workers from the damages of those things, while also allowing Marylanders who want to work in that sector of the economy to do so without big corporate influence.
Power to the people.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you, Owen. Thank you, everybody, for watching. It has been a great run of shows. We're excited to take this break for a couple of weeks. You can, of course, find us on the internet and on the social medias and those types of things. The show will be back soon. If you sign up for our email, you'll see it. If you follow us on our socials, you'll see it. If you have any questions or ideas that you want to share, you can always reach me at andy@gogreen2026.com. I know there are some of you who I'm in regular touch with, but I'd love to be in touch with any of the rest of you. And if you are interested in helping out this campaign, Andrew, who is our new volunteer coordinator, is actively working through the volunteer requests. So you can get in touch with him at gogreen2026.com/volunteer. We are excited to go into the spring. We think this part of the year where we've been focused on the General Assembly and the legislative session has been really important and really valuable. And we're also excited to switch into the next part of it where we, are focused on talking to people around the state, focused on building out this campaign, and focused on hitting those goals so that we can bring the arguments, the values, the solutions, and the Maryland we all deserve. And I think we're making great progress toward it. And I appreciate everybody's work and support to help us get there. And I'm excited to take a couple of weeks of break.
Peace out, everybody.
Have a good night. Thank you.